Lyra stood alone on the alien planet, her heart heavy as the wind whispered through the tall silver grasses. The sky, a soft shade of purple, seemed to match the sadness in her heart. Her husband, once the light of her life, was gone. He had been a human, a soldier from Earth, and the love they had shared was something she never thought she would lose. Yet here she was, standing at his grave, the pain of his absence overwhelming her every thought. The cemetery was quiet, the only sound being the gentle rustling of the plants in the wind. The grave was simple, just a stone marker with her husband's name engraved on it. His name, Jason Stone, was all that remained of him now, and the stone felt cold under Lyra's touch as she placed her hand on it. She had been married to Jason for 10 years, a short time in the eyes of her people. But to her, it felt like a lifetime. Lyra was from a long-living race of aliens, and her people did not often experience death the way humans did. Their lifespans stretched into centuries, making the loss of a loved one all the more painful. But Jason had not been like the others. He had been her rock, her strength, and her companion through countless battles. The war between her people and the Zorathians had been long and brutal, and it was in that chaos that she had met Jason. He had saved her life more times than she could count, and every time he did, he would smile and tell her the same thing. "We'll make it through. Lyra, together." Now, those words were only a memory. Lyra wiped away a tear that had fallen down her cheek, her fingers trembling slightly. She had tried to hold back her grief, to be strong as her people expected, but nothing could stop the overwhelming sadness that filled her heart. She had loved him deeply, and now, without him, she felt lost. In the days after Jason's death, she had retreated into herself, unable to face the reality of being alone. She had no idea how to move forward without him. The days were long, and the nights were even longer. The quietness of the house they had shared together was suffocating. Lyra couldn't bear the emptiness of it. Every corner seemed to whisper his name, and every piece of furniture reminded her of the life they had built. But now, that life was gone. Her friends and family had tried to comfort her, but they didn't understand. They couldn't. They had never experienced the kind of love she had known with Jason. They had never known what it was like to be truly loved by a human. Humans were different from her people. They were fragile, their lives short compared to hers, but their hearts were fierce. Jason had loved her with all his being, something no one could ever replace. The tears began to flow more freely now as Lyra knelt at the grave, her sobs shaking her body. She had never felt such loneliness. The grief had taken hold of her, and she didn't know how to escape it. Her heart felt heavy as if it were weighed down by the stars themselves. She had lost everything, and she didn't know how to keep going without him. As she sat there, lost in her sorrow, she heard a sound behind her. At first, it was faint, just the crunching of gravel underfoot. But then, it grew louder, and Lyra turned her head to see a figure walking toward her. It was a man, a human, and though she had not expected anyone, there was something familiar about the way he moved. The man's steps were slow, deliberate, as if he knew the grief she carried. He was dressed in simple clothes, a soldier's uniform, but there was something in his eyes that caught Lyra's attention. He wasn't like the others. There was a warmth to him, a kindness that seemed to radiate from his very being. The man stopped a few feet away from Lyra, his gaze soft but steady. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his voice calm and gentle. "I knew Jason." Lyra wiped her eyes and stood up slowly. Her throat felt tight, and she struggled to find the words. "You knew him?" she asked, her voice cracking with emotion. The man nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "Yes, I served with him during the war. We fought side by side." He paused, as if lost in his own thoughts for a moment. He was a good man. He saved my life more than once. Lyra felt a strange sense of comfort in his words, though the pain in her heart didn't fade. She had not expected to meet anyone who knew Jason here, in this quiet place. It was as if fate had brought him to her at the moment she needed someone. The most. "My name is Jackson," the man said, extending his hand. "I promised Jason I would check on you. Make sure you're all right." Lyra stared at his hand for a moment, unsure. She had never been one to trust easily, especially not with a human. But there was something in his eyes. Something familiar and kind, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a small flicker of hope. "Lyra," she said, shaking his hand hesitantly. I don't know what to say." Jackson smiled softly, his eyes warm. "You don't have to say anything. I'm just here to listen, if you want to talk." Lyra looked at him for a moment, studying his face. He was tall, with short brown hair and kind eyes. There was something about him that made her feel safe, something she hadn't felt in a long time. But still the grief was there, heavy and unrelenting. How could she ever move on? How could she ever love again? I don't know if I can," she whispered, looking down at the grave. Jackson stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "I'm not asking you to forget him, Lyra. I'm just here to help you. You don't have to be alone." For a moment, Lyra was silent, her heart heavy with emotions she couldn't quite understand. Could she really allow someone else into her life? Could she let go of the past and begin again? She didn't know the answers, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry her grief alone. As Jackson stood beside her, offering silent support, Lyra took a deep breath. It was a small step, but it was enough to start healing. The days that followed Jackson's arrival on the planet were filled with a strange quietness. Lyra had tried to return to her usual routine, but everything felt different. The house she had shared with Jason now felt too empty, too silent. Even the vibrant landscapes outside her window seemed dimmer, as though the whole world was reflecting her sadness. Jackson, however, stayed close by, offering quiet companionship. He had not pushed her to talk more than she was ready to. He respected her need for solitude, but he was always there when she needed a friendly face or even just a quiet presence. Lyra wasn't sure how to feel about it at first. She had never been someone to lean on others, especially not a human. Yet there was something about Jackson's calm demeanor that made her feel less alone. Something about the way he simply was, not asking for anything in return, but offering everything he had. Each morning, Jackson would come by, always at sunrise. He would bring her a basket of fresh fruit from the nearby fields, a simple offering that made her smile despite herself. Lyra found it hard to believe how easy it was for him to be kind. For a while, she had almost forgotten what kindness felt like. One morning, Lyra stood by the window, looking out at the distant hills. The purple skies were beginning to brighten as the sun began to rise. It reminded her of the mornings she had shared with Jason. He had loved these moments, the quietness before the day began, when everything felt peaceful and new. Lyra closed her eyes, trying to hold on to that memory, but the pain that followed was too strong. She opened her eyes again, just as Jackson stepped onto the porch. "Good morning, Lyra," Jackson called gently, his voice breaking the silence. She turned to face him, and for a moment she saw only the stranger, the man who reminded her of the one she had lost. But then, as Jackson gave her a warm smile, something inside her shifted. He wasn't here to replace Jason, nor would he ever be. But there was something about his presence, his quiet understanding, that offered her a sliver of comfort. "Morning, Jackson," she replied softly. He held up the basket of fruit, his eyes glinting with the kindness that seemed to come so naturally to him. "I brought you some fresh oranges today. Thought you might like them." Lyra took the basket, her fingers, brushing against his for a brief moment. The touch was simple, yet it sent a strange warmth through her. She looked up at him, wondering what it was about this human that made her feel something she hadn't felt in so long. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson nodded, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "No need to thank me," he said, his tone light but sincere. "It's nothing." Lyra couldn't help but smile a little. It was true. It was just a basket of fruit, a simple gesture, but it felt important. She watched as Jackson made his way into the kitchen, as if he belonged there, as if he were part of her world. "Do you mind if I stay a while?" Jackson asked, glancing over his shoulder. Lyra hesitated for only a moment before replying. "I suppose you can. I don't mind." He sat at the table, waiting for her to join him. She sat across from him, placing the basket in the center. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small step toward rebuilding something. Perhaps not a new life, but a life that could be lived again. One small piece at a time. As they ate, they didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt natural, even healing. Every now and then, Jackson would look at her, and his eyes would carry a question, but he never asked it. He seemed content to let her lead, to allow her to speak when she was ready. Lyra appreciated that more than she could express. Days turned into weeks, and Jackson continued to visit, never demanding more from her than she was willing to give. He would accompany her on walks through the fields, sometimes in silence, other times speaking quietly about life on Earth, or about his own experiences as a soldier. Lyra found herself listening more and more, curious about his world, his thoughts. She learned that he had grown up in a small town, far from the noise of cities where life was simple and quiet. He wasn't used to the vast emptiness of space, the endless stretches of stars and planets. It was all so different from Earth, so strange and distant. And yet, when he spoke, his voice was filled with warmth and familiarity. One afternoon, as they walked through the fields, the soft grass brushing against their ankles, Lyra felt a strange sense of peace. It was fleeting, but it was there. For the first time since Jason's death, she felt a glimmer of hope. "You know," Jackson said, breaking the silence, "I think he would be happy to know that you're doing okay, that you're taking care of yourself." Lyra looked at him, her heart tightening. "You really think so?" Jackson smiled, his eyes gentle. "I do. He talked about you all the time, about how lucky he was to have found someone like you." Lyra's chest tightened at the mention of Jason. It was hard to imagine him ever being gone, even though she had lost him. The thought of him was still so fresh, so painful. But there was something in Jackson's words that made her feel a little less alone. He wasn't just talking to her. He was speaking of Jason as if he were still alive, as if his memory mattered. "Thank you," Lyra said, her voice soft. "It means a lot to hear that." Jackson nodded, his expression serious now. "I mean it. And I'll be here, Lyra. You don't have to go through this alone." For a moment, Lyra didn't know what to say. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. She had spent so much time trying to hold everything inside, trying to keep her pain locked away. But with Jackson, something had changed. Maybe it was his gentle nature, or maybe it was just that he cared. But for the first time, Lyra felt like she didn't have to carry her grief by herself. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold, Lyra allowed herself to feel a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. With Jackson by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to heal. The sun had begun to rise earlier each day, and with it, Lyra's sense of hope grew. though still fragile. She had never expected that, in the wake of her husband's death, a human would become the one person she could rely on. Yet here she was, slowly learning to live again with Jackson by her side. Each day, Jackson's visits became longer, his presence more natural. The two of them would spend hours together, often walking through the vast fields that surrounded Lyra's home. They spoke of little things, nothing deep, nothing too personal at first, but the conversations, small as they were, brought a sense of comfort. Lyra had never thought she would find peace in someone else's company. After losing Jason, she had felt that part of her was gone forever. But with Jackson, there was something calming about the way he didn't try to replace Jason, or even push her to forget. He simply let her feel what she needed to feel, without any pressure. One afternoon, as the two of them sat in the shade of a large tree, Lyra found herself telling him about the moment she had shared with Jason, the way he laughed when she would challenge him to a race through the fields, the way his eyes would light up whenever they spoke about the future they planned to have together. Jackson listened quietly, his eyes never leaving her face as she spoke. He had heard these stories before, but each time they seemed to mean more to him. There was no jealousy in his gaze, only empathy. He understood, in a way that few could, the depth of her pain. "It sounds like you two had something special," Jackson said after a long pause. "Jason was a good man. I wish I could have met him before." Lyra smiled faintly, a sad, bittersweet smile. "You would have liked him," she said softly. "He was brave, kind, and stubborn." She chuckled, quietly. "He never gave up on anything, not even when things got tough." Jackson smiled, his expression warm. "I'm sure he would have said the same about you." Lyra's heart tightened at his words. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear something like that. It wasn't that she needed validation, but rather the simple truth that Jason's memory could live on through the people who had known him. And now, in a strange way, Jackson had become a link between her and the past. As the days passed, Lyra noticed something subtle changing within herself. She had spent so much time living in the shadow of her grief, but now there was a lightness in her heart that hadn't been there before. It wasn't that she had forgotten Jason. Nothing could ever make her forget him. But there was room for new experiences, for new feelings. Jackson never pushed her to move on, but he was always there. When she needed a hand to hold or a shoulder to lean on, his patience and kindness began to fill a space in her heart she hadn't realized was empty. One evening, as the two of them sat by the small stream near her house, watching the stars slowly appear in the sky, Lyra turned to Jackson, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it's possible to love again?" Jackson looked at her, his expression serious, as though he had been waiting for her to ask that question. "I think it's possible," he said gently, "but only when you're ready." Lyra nodded, staring up at the stars. The question had been on her mind for weeks now, but she hadn't known how to ask it. Could she ever feel that way again? Could she ever love another the way she had loved Jason? "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted quietly. "I still miss him so much, Jackson. I don't know if I could love anyone else." "You don't have to rush it," Jackson said softly. "You're not alone, Lyra. Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it, I'll be here. But no one is asking you to forget him or pretend that your love for him didn't matter. It was real, and it always will be." His words, so simple yet so understanding, eased the burden on her chest, even if only for a moment. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to hope again. The next few weeks passed by in a quiet blur. Lyra continued to spend time with Jackson, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting together in silence. Slowly, her grief began to feel less suffocating. It was still there, of course. The pain of losing Jason was something that would never completely fade. But it no longer ruled her life. She was beginning to live again, piece by piece, moment by moment. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold with the setting sun, Lyra found herself standing by the edge of the field, watching the wind move the tall grasses. She didn't realize that Jackson had come up behind her until she felt his presence beside her. "I've never been able to stay still for long," he said, his voice soft. "There's always been something pulling me forward." Lyra glanced at him, then back to the horizon. "I understand," she said quietly. "It's hard to stay still when there's so much left to do." Jackson smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't a smile full of sadness or longing. It was a smile of hope, a smile that looked toward the future instead of the past. "We'll find our way," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Lyra turned to him then, her heart pounding. She didn't know why she felt the way she did, but in that moment, standing beside him, everything felt right. She wasn't ready to move on from Jason. Not yet, not completely. But maybe, just maybe, there was room in her heart for something new. Something that didn't erase the past, but built on it. Without thinking, she reached out, touching Jackson's arm gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Jackson looked down at her hand, then back at her. There was no need for words in that moment. They both understood. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something more. A bond had formed between them, fragile yet real, and in that bond, there was hope. Lyra didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. With Jackson by her side, she would face it, one step at a time. The days had slowly turned into weeks, and for the first time since Jason's death, Lyra found herself smiling more often. Jackson had become a steady presence in her life, someone she could talk to when the weight of grief felt too much to carry, alone. But more than that, he had become a friend. Someone who understood her pain, who never tried to force her to move on, but who simply was there when she needed someone. Lyra had never expected to feel anything other than sorrow for the rest of her life, but little by little, she was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, there was room in her heart for more than just the memory of Jason. One afternoon, after another long walk through the fields, Lyra and Jackson sat on the porch of her home. The sun had started to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. The air was warm, and the evening's calm felt like a balm on her soul. You know, Jason used to say that sunsets like this were a reminder that every ending had a new beginning, Lyra said quietly, gazing out at the fading light. Jackson turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "He sounds like a wise man," he said, his voice soft. Lyra smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "He was," she agreed. "I miss him every day. But I think he was right, you know? Every ending does lead to something new." Jackson didn't speak right away. Instead, he simply sat beside her, allowing the silence to settle between them, comfortable and unhurried. It was in these moments, these simple, quiet exchanges, that Lyra had come to realize just how much she appreciated Jackson's presence in her life. He never asked for more than she was willing to give, but he never pulled away either. He was patient, understanding, and kind. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jackson finally broke the silence. "Lyra, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Lyra turned to him. Her curiosity piqued. She had noticed a certain seriousness in his tone, a depth to his gaze that made her wonder what he was about to say. "What is it?" she asked softly. Jackson took a deep breath, his hand resting on his knee as he shifted to face her more directly. I know this might seem sudden, he began, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I want to be honest with you. I've never met anyone like you, Lyra, not in all my years of traveling across the galaxy. You're strong, kind, and you have this light about you that makes everything better, just by being around. Lyra's heart fluttered a little at his words, but she remained silent, unsure of what to say. Jackson continued, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. I don't want to take away what you had with Jason. I don't want to erase that part of your life. It will always be a part of who you are, he said gently. But I also don't want you to be alone. Not forever. You deserve happiness again, Lyra. You deserve to have someone who cares for you, who loves you, the way you've loved before. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure where this conversation was leading, but she knew that it was important. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation, but all she found was sincerity. Jackson, she began, but her voice trailed off as she struggled to find the right words. She had never expected to have this conversation with him, not like this. Jackson smiled gently, almost as if he understood the turmoil in her mind. I'm not asking you to forget Jason, he said. I'm not asking you to move on from him. Completely. I can't take his place, and I don't want to. But what I can offer you is a future. A future where you don't have to face everything alone. Lyra's heart raced in her chest as she absorbed his words. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. She had never thought she would be asked to love again, not after Jason. The idea of starting over, of opening herself to someone else, felt impossible, and yet Jackson was making it sound so simple. She turned her gaze toward the sky, her mind a swirl of emotions. She had spent so many months holding on to the past, holding on to Jason's memory like a lifeline, and yet here was Jackson, offering her a chance at something new, something different. It wasn't about forgetting Jason. It wasn't about replacing him, it was about healing, about finding a way to live, even after loss. What are you asking, Jackson? She asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. Jackson's expression grew more serious, his eyes locking onto hers with such intensity that it almost took her breath away. He took her hand in his, holding it gently but firmly. I'm asking you to trust me, he said quietly. I'm asking you to let me be part of your life, not as a replacement for Jason, but as someone who will stand beside you, someone who will help you carry the weight of the past and move forward with you, step by step. Lyra's heart beat faster as she processed his words. The fear, the uncertainty that had held her back for so long began to fade, replaced by something she hadn't expected to feel: hope. Hope for the future, hope for the possibility of love, even if it would be different from what she had known before. I don't know if I'm ready, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Jackson squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing over her skin in a soothing motion. You don't have to be ready now. I'm not asking you to make a decision today. All I want is the chance to show you that it's okay to live again, that it's okay to let someone in. Lyra looked down at their intertwined hands, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the moment. For so long she had been afraid that she would never feel whole again, that her heart would forever be chained to the past. But Jackson was giving her a choice, a chance to begin anew, even if the path forward was uncertain. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. All she saw was sincerity. I don't know what the future holds, Jackson, she said, softly, her voice barely a whisper. But I'll try. I'll try to trust you, and I'll try to let go of the past, little by little, Jackson's face softened with relief, and a smile spread across his lips. "That's all I can ask for," he said. "We'll take it one step at a time, Lyra, together." For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a spark of excitement. Maybe the future wasn't as scary as she had once thought. Maybe there was room in her heart for new beginnings, for a future that she hadn't expected. And with Jackson by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back to happiness. The days following Jackson's proposal were filled with a mixture of emotions that Lyra couldn't fully understand. There were moments when the idea of a future with him felt like a distant possibility, something she could reach out and touch. But then there were other moments, quieter ones, when the weight of her past, of Jason, would pull her back, making her question everything she had begun to feel for Jackson. Could she really move on? Could she love again? It wasn't that she didn't care for Jackson. She did, in ways that both frightened and comforted her. He had become such an important part of her life, and yet the memory of her husband, Jason, still lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. Jason had been her heart, her soul, the one person who had understood her better than anyone else. Could she ever love anyone the way she had loved him? The thought of it made her heart ache, but at the same time, she knew that Jackson wasn't asking her to forget Jason. He was offering her a chance to heal, a chance to live again. Lyra sat alone one evening, gazing out at the stars. The night sky was filled with endless dots of light, each one a reminder of the vastness of the universe. She had always loved looking at the stars with Jason. They had spent countless nights together under that very sky, talking about their hopes and dreams, imagining the future they would share. But now, those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't here anymore. She sighed deeply, wrapping her arms around herself as a chill in the air crept into her bones. It was hard, so hard, to let go of the life she had imagined with Jason, and yet she couldn't keep holding on to a memory that was gone. Jackson was here, offering her something different, something real, and the thought of closing herself off to that was becoming unbearable. "Lyra?" Her thoughts were interrupted by Jackson's voice. He was standing in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the soft glow of the house behind him. His eyes met hers, and there was an understanding in them that made her heart twist. He had been patient with her, giving her the space she needed to process her emotions. But she knew deep down that he was waiting for an answer. He was waiting for her to make a decision. Lyra wiped a stray tear from her cheek before standing and walking toward him. The cold evening air made her shiver, but she didn't mind. She had always been able to find comfort in the cool breeze, in the stillness of the world around her. It was in these moments, when everything was quiet, that she could hear her own thoughts more clearly. Jackson stepped forward, his gaze soft and full of concern. "You've been quiet lately. Are you okay?" he asked gently. Lyra nodded, though her heart told a different story. "I'm fine," she said, though the words felt hollow. "I've just been thinking." "About what?" Jackson asked, his voice low and inviting, as though he were offering her a safe space to speak. Lyra took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling in her mind. How could she explain the turmoil inside her heart? How could she tell him that she didn't know if she was ready to let go of the past, to embrace a future with him? "I don't know if I can do this, Jackson," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to. I really do. But every time I think I'm ready, I feel guilty. I feel like I'm betraying Jason. He was my everything, and I can't just forget that." Jackson's face softened, and he took a step closer to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to forget him, Lyra," he said quietly. "No one is asking you to do that. I'm not asking you to forget the love you shared. What you had with Jason was real, and it will always be a part of you. But that doesn't mean you can't have a future too. You can still love him and love again." Lyra shook her head, tears welling in her eyes once more. "But how do I do that? How do I move on from him when everything I do reminds me of him? How do I give my heart to you when it still belongs to him?" Jackson's hand slid down to her hand, and he gently squeezed it, offering what little comfort he could. "You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to let go of everything all at once. I'll be here, Lyra, every step of the way. You don't have to face this alone." Lyra looked up at him, her heart aching with the weight of his words. He wasn't asking for her to choose him right away. He was asking for a chance, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine a future with him, a future that wasn't just about the past, but about moving forward together. "I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be yet," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jackson's thumb brushed across her hand in a reassuring gesture. "You don't have to be. You just have to be yourself, and when you're ready, when you feel ready to love again, I'll be here." Lyra's heart clenched at the kindness in his words, the patience he showed her. He wasn't rushing her, wasn't demanding anything from her. He was simply offering her the space to heal, to come to him when she was ready. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the world around them still and peaceful. Lyra's thoughts continued to churn, but she could feel something inside, her shifting, something softening. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to open her heart again. Maybe, just maybe, it was possible to love without forgetting. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, her voice shaking. "I'm scared of losing him again, of loving someone and having to let go of them." Jackson nodded, understanding. "I'm scared too," he said quietly. "But I think the best way to honor Jason's memory is to live the life he wanted for you, to keep moving forward, to keep loving, to keep living. I don't want to take his place, Lyra. I just want to be with you and help you through this, whatever it takes." Lyra looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her grief lift just a little. She wasn't ready to let go of everything, but maybe it was okay to take small steps. Maybe she didn't have to figure it all out today. "Thank you, Jackson," she whispered, squeezing his hand in return. "I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'll try. I'll try to be open to it." Jackson smiled softly, his eyes full of warmth and understanding. "That's all I can ask for." As the night stretched on, Lyra stood by Jackson's side, her heart a little lighter, her future a little clearer. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew that she didn't have to face it alone. For the first time in a long while, the possibility of a new beginning didn't seem so impossible. The days had begun to blend together. The grief that had once consumed Lyra slowly started to feel less suffocating, though it never completely disappeared. It lingered, like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. But now it wasn't the only thing in her life. Now there was Jackson, and with him, a growing sense of hope, a hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Lyra had spent so many months trapped in the past, holding on to memories of Jason, unable to imagine a future without him. But little by little, Jackson had helped her see that life could still hold meaning, even after loss. He had never tried to replace Jason, nor would he ever. He had simply offered her the kindness and patience she needed to heal, and with each passing day, she found herself letting go of the past just a little more. One evening, as the two of them sat on the porch, watching the stars slowly appear in the night sky, Lyra felt something shift within her. The air was cool and fresh, the kind of evening she had always enjoyed with Jason. But tonight, she didn't feel the overwhelming sadness she had grown so accustomed to. Instead, she felt something lighter, a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. "Jackson," she said quietly, breaking the silence between them. Do you think it's possible to start over? He turned to her, his eyes soft with understanding. What do you mean? I mean, after everything that's happened, she paused, searching for the right words. After everything I've been through, do you think it's possible for me to really move forward, to love again? Jackson's expression didn't change, but the kindness in his eyes deepened. I think it's possible. Not because it's easy, but because you're strong enough to take the first step. It's not about forgetting what you had with Jason. It's about finding a way to live without letting the past hold you back. Lyra looked up at the stars, her thoughts swirling. She had been so afraid to let go of the past, to let go of the love she had shared with Jason. But now, sitting here with Jackson, she realized that she didn't have to let go of the past completely. She could carry Jason's memory with her, but still allow herself to experience new things, new feelings. I'm ready, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I think I'm ready. Jackson smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth and reassurance. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to have all the answers. Just take it one day at a time. Lyra nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it. She wasn't going to forget Jason. She wasn't going to erase the love they had shared. But she was ready to find a way to move forward, to make room for new experiences, new connections. The following days passed by in a blur of small moments. Jackson continued to be by her side, offering support without pushing her. They spent time together, walking through the fields, talking about everything and nothing at all. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It was about the quiet moments, the ones that showed Lyra that she wasn't alone. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun begin to set, Jackson turned to Lyra, his expression serious yet gentle. Lyra, he began, his voice steady. I want you to know something. You don't have to rush into anything. I'm not asking for you to make a decision about us right now. I'm just asking you to take the time you need. I care about you and I always will, no matter what happens. Lyra looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. He wasn't asking her to choose him over Jason. He wasn't trying to force her into a decision she wasn't ready to make. He was simply giving her the space to figure things out on her own, to heal at her own pace. I know, she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. And I appreciate that more than you know. The days grew warmer as the seasons changed, and with each passing day, Lyra felt herself becoming more at peace with the decision she had made. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the grief of losing Jason would come crashing down on her like a wave. But there were also moments of joy, moments when she could laugh with Jackson, moments when she could feel a sense of hope for the future. One evening, as the two of them sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames casting a soft glow on their faces, Jackson turned to her with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Lyra, he said quietly, I know you're still healing, and that's okay. But I also know that you're not the same person you were when I first met you. You've come so far, and I'm so proud of you. Lyra's chest tightened at his words, and she felt a rush of emotion. I don't think I could have done it without you, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. You've been patient with me when I didn't deserve it. You've given me space to grieve, but you've also given me the strength to move forward. I can't thank you enough for that. Jackson smiled, his hand gently resting on hers. You've always had the strength, Lyra. You just needed someone to remind you of it. Lyra looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. She had always been strong, but it had taken her a long time to see that. It had taken her a long time to see that there was life after loss, that love didn't have to end when someone was gone. Love could take many forms, and it could grow and change, even when it seemed impossible. I think I'm ready for the future now, Lyra said quietly, her voice filled with certainty. And I'm ready to share it with you, if you'll have me. Jackson's eyes lit up, and without saying another word, he leaned in and kissed her gently on the forehead. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more to Lyra than words could express. In that moment, she knew that she wasn't alone anymore. She had found something new, something worth living for, and she was ready to embrace it, one step at a time.